Good evening. Welcome to Recovering Perfectionist Mama, Grace in Progress. Today, we're talking about the grief of being too late, why delayed validation still hurts, ambiguous loss, and why closure is a myth. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from loss alone. It comes from timing, from being seen after you needed protection, from being believed after you learned how to survive without it, from being validated when it no longer changes the outcome. This is the grief of being too late. And it's one of the least talked about and most misunderstood forms of grief there is. Why delayed validation still hurts. We're often told the validation is healing, and it should be. That once someone finally says, "You were right," or "I didn't realize it was that bad," the pain should resolve. But delayed validation doesn't bring relief at first. It brings grief first. Because what it really says is, you weren't imagining it. You weren't too sensitive. You were telling the truth. And you endured it alone. That realization lands heavily, not because validation is meaningless, but because it confirms the cost of not having it when it mattered. Delayed validation removes the last layer of self-doubt that once softened the blow. And underneath that doubt is mourning. Mourning the protection that never came, the advocacy that was missing, the version of you that might have existed if you'd been believed sooner, the double loss no one warned you about. This kind of grief carries two losses, not one. First, the original harm, then the neglect, the minimization, the betrayal, the silence, and second, the loss of time. The loss of who you might have been without hypervigilance, the loss of ease, the loss of being able to trust your own perceptions without question. This is why people sometimes feel destabilized when acknowledgement finally arrives. It's not regression. It's grief that was never given permission before. Ambiguous loss, without proof or permission. This grief often lives under something called ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss happens when there's no clear ending, no public recognition, no shared agreement that something meaningful was taken. You might be grieving a parent who was physically present but emotionally unsafe. A family that existed in name but not in protection. A childhood that required you to grow up too early. There's no ceremony for that, no universally accepted language. So people say things like, "At least you know now," "At least they admitted it," "At least it wasn't worse." But "at least" doesn't heal ambiguous loss, because ambiguous loss isn't resolved. It's integrated, slowly, unevenly, and on your terms. Why closure is a myth. We're told to seek closure as if it's a destination, but closure assumes a shared reality, accountability, emotional maturity, a willingness to repair, and often none of those things are present. When they aren't, chasing closure becomes another form of self-abandonment, another attempt to make peace with something that was never safe. What actually heals isn't closure, it's recognition. Recognition says, "This happened, it mattered, it shaped me. I don't need agreement to grieve it." Closure tries to end the story. Recognition allows the story to be true and then allows you to move forward without denying yourself. The nervous system truth. Delayed validation teaches the body something very specific. Safety arrives late. Support is conditional. Truth is acknowledged only when it costs nothing. So even when validation finally comes, the nervous system doesn't relax. It asks, "Where were you when I needed you?" That question isn't bitterness, it's grief. And once you understand that, the pain stops feeling like a personal failure. What healing actually looks like here. Healing doesn't mean pretending that the timing didn't matter. It means allowing grief without rushing it into meaning, letting anger and sadness coexist without correcting either, honoring what you carried without needing applause, letting recognition come from yourself first. Sometimes the most honest sentence is simply, "This should have been different." No fixing, no reframing, no forgiveness deadline, just truth. In closing, you're not late to your healing. You're grieving what finally became undeniable. And that grief doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're no longer gaslighting yourself. That's not weakness, that's honesty. And that requires a lot of bravery and your ability to be able to tell the truth from what happened to you. And that's huge. So thank you for tuning in. I hope that this gave you some insight and maybe some encouragement. And thank you for tuning into tuning into Recovering Perfectionist Mama, where Grace in Progress. Sorry, I had a moment there. I appreciate you all and know that your presence means a lot to me, and your involvement in the community also means a lot to me. So thank you very much. If you have some ideas for some stories, please feel free to drop them in the community. As you know, I respond and engage in the community as well. So thanks a lot, every single one of you. I just want to say thank you for tuning in. It means a lot. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.